Lots of room. He's 40. Like a rocket. Look at Ginty go. Breaks a tackle. He's 20. He's 10. He's touchdown.
Here's a long run. Oklahoma State gonna do it again, and guess who? Big O to the house.
Milroe gonna run it again. Got a lane. Kicked in the turbo. Milroe. Goodbye. Touchdown, Bama.
Pump fake. Cook. End zone. Caught. Touchdown. Luther Burden the third.
This is the CFS Sites Week 10 show. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the college fantasy football site. And quite a bit to get to tonight. We're going to be talking about some players, doing well right now. Some players that, are hurt right now. We've got a lot of players out there that are making a run at the 20 touchdown total. And just to kind of tee up, we're going to spend the last part of the show, or at least a part of that, looking back over the last several years at the most times we've had guys score at least 20 touchdowns in a season. So it'll be some fun names I'm going to throw out at you. We'll talk about an update where I at on the Heisman race. And then, of course, we're going to talk about what I think is probably the biggest lineup choice you're going to have to make this year. All of that before the show closes. But, let me just, since I teased that, let me just throw it out there. There are a number of players this year that are making a run for 20 touchdowns in the season. You have to go back to 2021 when I think we've had more than 4 in a season. We had 8 that year. In 2016, we had 11, but in 2019, we have 12. So we're going to run down some names from that 2019 season for all you guys that were playing college fantasy back then, and just let you guys think about the names as I throw them out there on whether or not you had them that year or you remember playing against them. But, let's just start with the games. And, there are some players on this week's list. There's a lot of injuries. You're talking about Le'Veon Moss at Texas A&M. You're looking at Jordan McLeod at Texas State that had an ankle injury this past week that really cost his fantasy owners. It seems like they kept him out of that for precautionary reasons. At least that's what was reported. We'll see if that keeps him out of action in the coming weeks. Le'Veon Moss lost for the season. That bumps Amari Daniels' stock. And then you just had players like Baylor Sawyer Robertson, who, he's accounted for 3 or more touchdowns, I think, for 5 straight games going into the last week's matchup against TCU. And then he just lays a goose egg, didn't get 1 touchdown. Nothing you could do that. Baylor had 5 rushing touchdowns in the game. Robertson didn't account for any one of those. And so sometimes you just have to chalk it up to bad luck. I mean, look at what happened with Cam Ward just a week ago. He had 0 touchdowns. And, that's a player that we're talking about in the Heisman race this week. Bryson Daly, the Army quarterback, who I had as, the highest projected player going into week 10. And then he was a scratch. We find out on the morning of kickoff that he was a scratch, and really curious to see if he plays this week. Army gets North Texas. I don't know if you can get a better matchup on paper than what he has this week. And now he'll go into that matchup questionable, and his fantasy owners will be kind of, if you're in a must-win situation, really looking to make up some ground. Where do you go, right? And I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place this week, but a guy that I'll throw out there, I'm sorry, Army doesn't play North Texas this week. It was UTSA that plays North Texas. So you've got a guy out there like Owen McCown. There was the link I was trying to draw to North Texas. He's accounted for 3 TDs. I think passing 3 TDs in 4 of his last 6 games. UTSA plays North Texas this week. Owen McCown, in my opinion, is a really sneaky pickup on the waiver wire this week, that if you need some firepower at the quarterback position, that might be your guy this week. UTSA plays North Texas. And so I mentioned the bump for Amari Daniels already at Texas A&M. Obviously, I'm not sure Smith really figures into the running game that heavily. I think you'll see a heavier dose of Amari Daniels. We'll see how that plays out as well. Talking about newcomers on the block or maybe welcome back party. How about Appalachian State's Joey Aguilar, 3 passing TDs in 3 straight games. He didn't throw for three TDs one time in the first 5 games of the year. Could that be that they have a complementary piece in the running game? Amani Marshall, maybe a sneaky pickup on the waiver wire. 2 consecutive 100-yard games, ran for 20, had 23 carries for 120 yards against Old Dominion, 18 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown against Georgia State. Put Amani Marshall on the list. Throwing out some names. I know some of you guys that were hit by injuries. I mean, look, Arizona State, Cam Scatabo, been an absolute monster this year. He's like a multi-touchdown machine. We're getting word that now he's questionable to doubtful for this week's matchup. How about Oklahoma State's Ollie Gordon? Touchdown now in 3 consecutive games. Only 25 yards rushing, but a touchdown now in 3 consecutive games. What do? Oregon, wide receiver Tez Johnson, another injury. As you notice on this week's show, we're not running through all the games. We're going through some of the bigger names that we're going to highlight that I know where you guys have been hit. Tez Johnson now. If I had to guess, I think fantasy owners need a plan for as if he's going to be gone for most of the season. I don't really think that the Ducks will throw him in harm's way just out of the gate. He could be out for a couple, 2, 3, maybe, who knows, 4 games, right? That brings us into the college fantasy football playoffs. I think if you have Tez Johnson, you have to prepare as if you're not going to have him back for your college fantasy football playoffs and prepare accordingly. Bump up for Evan Stewart, bump up Trayshawn Holden, right? And really bump up for anybody that plays against New Mexico. They've given up 35 plus points in 8 of 9 games this year. Good news if you have San Diego State this week, particularly Marquez Cooper. And great news if you're holding John Mateer, quarterback Washington State. You've got to get to that semifinal game. John Mateer against that New Mexico defense could be an absolute difference maker. I always say week 13 is the money week because you have to win the semifinals to win a good portion of your pot. You've got to get there to be able to win it. And to me, the money week is week 13, the semifinal week, because that's when you put yourself in the position to either take home first or second. So week 13, money week, John Mateer versus New Mexico. Let's take a minute and pause a little bit about Houston real quick. And this really isn't a fantasy point, but I just want to draw attention that Houston is 4-5. They go to Arizona and they host Baylor before they travel to BYU. I'm not saying they're going to beat BYU, but what a job Willie Fritz has done. And honestly, look, I was big on Parker Jenkins at the beginning of the year. No problem with me saying and swung and missed. I don't know where Houston's even getting the offense from to win these games, but their defense looks spectacular. Willie Fritz looks like he's going to rebuild it again like he did at Tulane. He's going to be able to do it at Houston. I'm really hopeful for that. It's going to be fun to watch Houston evolve from year 1 to year 2 under Willie Fritz. But Houston, maybe improbable 2 wins away from a bowl bid, but I don't know if those games against Arizona and Baylor are far-fetched the way that they're playing right now. Where do we want to go? Let's go to Ohio State, right? Because something that jumped out at me that's really, really interesting is that if, Quinshaw Judkins on the year has 5 rushing TDs. 6. I'm sorry. Quinshaw Judkins has 6 rushing touchdowns. Travion Henderson has 4. Together, they've totaled 10 rushing touchdowns. But in the last 5 weeks, Judkins only has 1 rushing touchdown and Travion Henderson has 0. Now, I haven't looked at it closely, but in the last 5 weeks, I would imagine that's a majority of Big Ten play. If you'd have told me that through the last 5 weeks that Judkins and Henderson, if you'd have told me at the beginning of the year that those guys would only have a combined 10 touchdowns at this point of the season, I would be like, nah, no way. Remember the beginning of the year, we were wondering, who should we get, Judkins or Henderson? And the answer right now is neither. one combined touchdown between the two in the last 5 weeks. Man, that's hard to even start any one of those guys. Maybe if you were in a Power 5 league. And then you look at Will Howard, he's got 5 rushing touchdowns himself. So he's got more rushing touchdowns than Henderson, and he has more than Judkins and Henderson combined over the last 5 weeks. Really interesting. I would have never seen that coming. TCU receiver Jack Besh, sigh of relief for his fantasy owners. It looked like he was trending down. 5 catches, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. Back on the train of Jack Besh for TCU. And then while we were talking about Houston a few minutes ago, I was in Discord this past weekend and we were talking about SMU. And I remember being in Discord early in the year where we were wondering if SMU was even going to be that good when they struggled to beat Nevada in week 0. Well, here we are going into week 11, and their only loss is an 18-15 loss to BYU, who's leading the Big 12. And they're 3 wins away from Boston College, Virginia, and Cal from possibly playing for an ACC championship and maybe getting into the college football playoff. And I know that a lot of us were really soured on Preston Stone. Look, another swing and a miss. We projected Stone as the starter. Many did. But that didn't happen. But with the change of quarterback, their defense playing extremely well. So much like Houston's doing it the Fritz way, SMU's finding a way to do it. And look, there's not really much fantasy firepower on that offense other than Brashard Smith. But you have to admire what SMU is doing. And as I look around at all my notes, I covered quite a bit in such a short amount of time because I really wanted to get to some good stuff. As I mentioned, at the top of the show, and I'm going to toggle through some screens here. But when we look back at this year right now, we have 2 players already at 20 touchdowns, Ashton Genty, Caleb Johnson. Chances are Bryson Daly would have gotten there this past weekend. Had he played, he's sitting on 19. Dylan Sampson at 19. RJ Harvey at 18. Trey Stewart of Jacksonville State at 16. Mario Anderson at 16. Bashul Tootin at Virginia Tech. He didn't play this last game. You would think he's still in the conversation to get there. Omarion Hampton at 14, Scatabo at 13. Like there's some guys that are within reach. So the question is, how many of those guys are going to get to 20 touchdowns? Well, we have to go to 2021, the last time we think we had more than 4. And I'll run down that list. In 2021, we had Rasheen Ali with 25, Breece Hall and Tyler Algier tied with 23 touchdowns. Deuce Vaughn, 22. Tavion Thomas of Utah with 21. Jerome Ford, Malik Cunningham, and Hassan Haskins of Michigan, all with 20. So then I mentioned in 2016, there were 11. We'll run down that list. Anthony Wales of Western Kentucky. Remember that name? 29 touchdowns that year. Jeremy McNichols, Boise State, 27. Will Worth, quarterback Navy, 25. Carlos Henderson, wide receiver, Louisiana Tech. Remember that year, 23 touchdowns. That was the year Saquon Barkley had 22 at Penn State. Brian Hill, Wyoming running back, had 22. Lamar Jackson, another quarterback, had 21. Aaron Jones, the running back at UTEP, he tied with James Conner, running back Pitt, Dalvin Cook of Florida State, and Itavius Mathers of Middle Tennessee with 20 touchdowns that year. So let's go to 2019. That was the year I mentioned that there were 12 guys that scored 20 or more touchdowns. Who were they? Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin, Xavier Jones of SMU, Darrington Evans of Appalachian State, Levante Bellamy of Western Michigan, J.K. Dobbins, Ohio State, and Travis Etienne both had 23. Chuba Hubbard, Oklahoma State, and Malcolm Perry, Navy quarterback, along with Jalen Hurts, who was at Oklahoma, all had 21. And then it was Najee Harris at Alabama with Jarrett Patterson at Buffalo and Jamar Chase at LSU, all 12 of those guys with 20 touchdowns. Now, that's a lot. I don't think we're going to get there this year, but I think we can get more than 8. And you know what? That's what makes college fantasy football so fun. When you get those high numbers, I mean, Anthony Wales, that 29 number. Let's go back to 2017. Devin Singletary had 33. Travis Etienne in 2018 led with 26. In 2019, Jonathan Taylor had the 26. In 2020, Najee Harris had 30. Let's see if somebody can take down that number this year. 2021, Rasheen Ali, we did cover that one already with 25. In 2022, Israel Abanaconda and Tajay Spears, the running backs from Pitt and Tulane, tied with 21. And then just last year, Blake Corum had 28, and he led all of the football. So a little fun there, a little history, but for some of you guys looking for some throwback names, there you go. Heisman update on my part. Here's what I would say. I don't think Genty's putting up any pinball numbers, but if Boise State keeps winning, I think he could grab some votes just from the possibility of Boise State and leading Boise State into the college football playoffs. I think Travis Hunter, you're looking at the most well-rounded athlete in college football. Hard to make a case against him. And even though I don't think Cam Ward is the best player in college football, I just think that Miami's defense has not looked too good. Miami has to put up a lot of numbers. It's allowing Ward to stay on the field and throw the ball more. And I'm just not sure. I mean, look, Miami looks like they can get beaten at any given week, but the longer they stay unbeaten, the longer they stay in the running for the ACC championship. And I think if you throw an ACC championship game and the big numbers on Ward's belt, given that, he is on the East Coast and there's some that will play into the East Coast biased. Because some of those late night games, how many people are watching Genty? How many people may be watching Hunter? I don't know. I just think it's Ward's Heisman to lose right now. We've got several weeks to go, but we'll see how that plays out. So that's almost going to do it. And I mentioned one thing before I wrap up this show, and this may be the quickest show of the year with a bunch of fun facts. You know what? I don't particularly think the show is going to get much longer as the season goes on, but I wanted to get this out as soon as I could. I know busy day tomorrow. Tomorrow is election day. And so I would say the biggest lineup decision you're going to make of the year is getting out there and making your selection to vote in the presidential race. So get out there and vote. That's it. The Week 10 show, short and sweet. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. I'll see you in Week 11. Till then.